They told me this was a simple salvage mission. Then I found her trapped beneath living metal, an enemy soldier bleeding out in a temple older than our war. Her skin was translucent, her fangs visible even in the dim light. And she asked for help in a language I shouldn't understand. Jake Morrison took each step like the ground might decide it was tired of holding his weight. Command said, "Find salvage, avoid contact, come home." Simple. The ionized dust coating every surface turned his comms into static soup. Command's voice broke apart, words dissolving into sharp, useless noise. Silence from the squad. Silence from the ship. Just the soft crunch of his boots and the low hum of his suit struggling to keep him alive. The planet resisted. Craters big enough to swallow dropships dotted the terrain, their edges sharp and crystalline. The rock formations weren't static. They shifted when you weren't looking, a slow grinding of geology that defied sense. Navigation became a guessing game. The only light came from glowing blue fungi clinging to the rock faces. Pretty, also toxic. Each spore-laden breath cost him. His suit's filter meter ticked down 59%, 58%, a quiet, expensive countdown. Every shadow hid things. Could be a sanguinary ambush point. Could be a fissure that would snap his leg. The official briefing called this rock low priority. A backwater, a quick grab, but the air felt heavy. His gut said otherwise. The place had a waiting quality, a patience. Protocol was clear. Do not engage. Do not deviate. Do not explore. In an environment this hostile, breaking protocol wasn't just a reprimand. It was a death sentence. He checked his wrist scanner. It was supposed to ping for human tech, maybe sanguinary alloys, standard stuff. Nothing older than 50 years. It stayed quiet. Then a new reading flickered, faint. Not a mechanical signature. Something else, organic, pulsing. It came from the structure ahead, the temple complex. Jagged spires of dark stone clawed at the violet sky. The scan strengthened. A rhythmic beat, soft but persistent. A heartbeat from the stone itself. He made the calculation. The dust storm was getting worse, cutting visibility. His filters were bleeding efficiency. Backup was static, and that signal was getting stronger, unstable. He looked at the temple entrance, a dark maw in the crystalline rock. Danger or opportunity? He adjusted his grip on his rifle. The anomaly was down there. He started moving toward it. Protocol told him to report the anomaly. Find cover. Wait. But the storm outside was a solid wall of orange dust now, and the signal on his wrist scanner pulsed like a steady, living thing. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't a generator. It was a rhythm, a slow, deep thrum that seemed to sync with the pounding in his own chest. His scanner's database drew a blank. Not human tech. Not sanguinary alloy signature. This was third category. Older, unregistered. The corridor walls were wrong. They curved in ways that made his eyes strain. The angles too soft, the archways too high. They were made of the same dark veined stone as the outside, but here, under the low light of his helmet lamp, he could see the etchings. Glyphs. No language on file. They spiraled down the hall, drawing him deeper. The pulse got louder. Not in his ears. In his bones, his comm crackled once with a broken transmission. A voice, maybe his lieutenant, chopped into syllables by the ionized interference. Or sun stat us, then it was gone. The scanner beeped a warning. The energy source was spiking. The rhythmic pulse started to stutter, the beat becoming erratic like a heart seizing up. Whatever it was getting less stable by the second. Not a good sign. He ran a gloved hand over the wall. The surface was warm, not from the sun, from the inside. The architecture wasn't just stone. Veins of a darker material, slick and almost wet-looking, ran through it. They pulsed with a faint internal light, matching the scanner's reading. It was biotech, advanced, integrated. The entire temple was less a building and more a system, a living system. Nothing in human science suggested this was possible. A structure that was part organism. The choice was simple in a suicidal kind of way. He could retreat, try to wait out the storm in a questionable shelter and hope backup arrived before his air filters gave out or the locals found him. Or he could follow the failing heartbeat of a dying machine into the dark, into a structure that defied every engineering principle he knew. Unprecedented danger, or unprecedented opportunity. A calculated risk. He went with the calculated risk. The corridor twisted downward, the air growing warmer, the glyphs on the walls glowing faintly now. reacting to his presence or to the building energy. The pulsing was a physical pressure in the air. He kept his rifle ready, but he knew on some level it was useless here. You don't shoot a heartbeat. He rounded a final corner and the corridor opened into a vast domed chamber. And there it was. The source. And it had a prisoner. He'd seen Sanguinari before. On intel screens, in briefings. You study your enemy. You learn their ship silhouettes, their armor design, their standard tactics. But none of that prepares you for seeing one pinned under a beam of what looks like living, pulsing metal. The light inside it synchronizing with the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Her skin wasn't just pale. It was a thin veil. Beneath it, he could see the faint tracery of her circulatory system, a network of soft light that pulsed a dull, fading blue. Her lips were pulled back from her teeth in a silent snarl of pain, and the fangs were exactly as the reports described. Long, sharp, practical. Her eyes found his. They weren't human eyes. The color was wrong, a deep violet, but the intelligence in them was unmistakable. She tracked his movement as he stepped into the chamber, her gaze calculating, assessing. She wasn't panicking. She was gathering data. Her armor was a dark, segmented carapace fused to her body in places, but other parts of it had melted, flowing into the floor and the beam itself. Her gear wasn't just on her. It was part of the room. The temple recognized her, and it was killing her. He kept his rifle low but didn't point it at her. A strange courtesy. The beam glowed brighter as she shifted her weight, a low groan escaping her. The metal seemed to constrict, tightening its grip. It was responding to her. Feeding on her. She stilled, the fight going out of her for a moment, and the light dimmed. A brutal form of biofeedback, she spoke. The sound was raspy, strained. His helmet's translator, designed for standard Sanguinari combat dialects, hissed and sputtered. A word came through clear. Help. The rest was static, a cascade of syllables his software couldn't parse. It was an old dialect, archaic, something you'd find in a history file, not on a battlefield. This changed the math, completely. The mission was salvage, avoid engagement. He was looking at an enemy soldier, a high-value target probably, wounded, trapped, an easy finish, a commendation, but she'd asked for help. And the thing holding her was the same ancient tech he was supposed to be recovering, a first contact scenario with a dying prisoner. His training offered zero protocols for this. The rulebook was suddenly a lot less helpful. He keyed his mic. Command, Morrison. I have a situation. Static answered him. The storm, the temple, the weird energy. Everything was working to keep him isolated. He was on his own. He looked from the trapped woman to the bizarre architecture, from the enemy to the impossible machine. The simple salvage mission was gone. Now he had a choice. A moral one. And those are always so much more complicated than the tactical kind. He let his rifle's sling take its weight, freeing his hands. First contact, great. He looked at her and saw the biology first. Human medics treat blood loss. They treat trauma. They look for the leak and try to stop it. But Lyra's problem wasn't a leak. The wound on her leg was bad, but it wasn't the main event. Her whole body was dimming. The soft internal light visible through her skin was fading, the blue network of her veins growing dull. She wasn't just injured. She was running on empty, a kind of empty humans don't experience. He offered her a standard nutrient paste from his kit. She shook her head, a weak motion. Her translator, patches of it fused to her throat, worked better than his. The words came out strained but clear. Incompatible. Your biology processes fuel for ATP. Mine requires a different catalyst. It wasn't about calories. It was about quantum alignment. Her people, the Hemincers, evolved to process blood through specialized organelles. They didn't just digest it. They read it. They used it. Their fangs weren't simple feeding tools. They were precision interfaces. Hypodermic needles connected directly to a biological quantum computer. When they fed, they weren't just taking in sustenance. They were downloading energy signatures, genetic data, even fragmented memories from the donor's cells. Blood was their fuel and their flash drive. A complete data storage and power system in one. This physiology let them interact with technology on a level humans could only simulate with machines. They could manipulate quantum fields, tweak probabilities, interface with systems designed for organic thought. The living beam holding her wasn't just metal. It was a biomechanical lock. It recognized her energy signature. It was calibrated for a Hemisphere. But it was also draining her, using her own biological energy to maintain its structural integrity. It was killing the key. For Jake, this changed everything. The briefing packs called them vampires, a scary name for a scary enemy. Monsters who drink blood. The reality was a lot more complicated, and a lot more dangerous. This wasn't a superstition. It was a science. Her very biology was a piece of technology his people didn't understand. A potential threat, yes. An enemy soldier with capabilities he couldn't predict. But also the biggest scientific discovery in a century. If human science could crack how her biology worked, it could revolutionize everything. Medicine, computing, energy. He looked from the fading light in her veins to the pulsing beam. Her nature was the problem and the solution. The lock needed a key. The key was dying, and the only thing that could recharge a Hemisphere's quantum-aligned batteries was the one thing his training said never to give an enemy, the one thing her biology was designed to process: blood. This was no longer a rescue. It was a terrible calculus, the potential of her biology versus the immediate threat of her death, the promise of a new science versus the violation of every protocol he'd ever been given. He held out the foil pack of nutrient paste. Standard issue, high-calorie, tasteless. She looked at it, then at him, her violet eyes narrowing with a mix of pain and something like pity. Her voice was a rasp, the translator on her throat flickering. Your fuel is not my fuel. My people. We need blood. The biological transfer. The quantum signature. There is no substitute. For her, feeding wasn't a choice. It was a mechanical requirement. Like breathing. But how you breathed mattered. Were you gasping in a panic or taking a calm, measured breath? The method defined you. She explained it between shallow breaths. Hemisphere society had rules. Strict ones. Codes of conduct older than most human governments. Feeding on the unwilling was abomination. A crime, a personal failure. Prisoners of war were off limits. The unconscious were off limits. You only took from those who offered. Freely, it was a transaction, a sacred one. Her people called it the voluntary covenant. The idea was that a willing donor's blood carried a clearer, stronger energy signature. Less psychic static, more efficient conversion. But more than that, it was about honor. Lyra had taken that code to its logical extreme. She refused any source that wasn't explicitly verbally consented, even if it meant going hungry. This hadn't made her popular with command. Her superiors saw it as a weakness, a liability. In a long war, you use the tools you have. Prisoners were a tool. She was reassigned, sent on missions with low survival odds, the kind where your principles become a quick path to a body bag. She'd been on Zapiria for 3 days before the temple trap snapped shut on her. 3 days without a proper feed. She was running on the dregs. Then the beam caught her, and it started draining what little she had left. The machine was an involuntary feeder. It didn't ask. Jake watched her. The enemy. The vampire. The soldier dying because she wouldn't break her own moral code. The narrative in his head, the one drilled into him through years of briefings and combat, began to fracture. The sanguinari were monsters, predators. They drank blood. That was the whole story. But here was one choosing to die rather than become the monster he'd been told she was. Her weakness wasn't from cowardice. It was from conviction. This changed the equation. It wasn't just about an enemy anymore. It was about a person. One with a sense of honor that, in a twisted way, mirrored the codes he lived by. Don't shoot prisoners. Offer aid to the wounded. The rules were different, but the intention felt familiar. The conflict itself started to look different. Less like a clear fight against evil and more like a tragedy. Two species who might have more in common than they thought, trying to kill each other over a misunderstanding they'd forgotten how to fix. He looked at the beam, at her fading light, and then at his own gloved hand. The moral complexity of the situation settled on him, heavy and inconvenient. This wasn't in the manual. Lyra shifted her weight, a pained gasp escaping her as she pressed her palm flat against a dark veined section of the wall. The stone wasn't stone. It reacted. A soft yellow light traveled up the wall's surface, following the path of the embedded veins. The whole chamber seemed to inhale. Then the air above the central dais shimmered. A star map resolved into focus, crisp and three-dimensional. Jake took a step back. That was not a sanguinari astrogation chart. He knew those. They used a different coordinate system, different symbols for key worlds. This map used standard human cartographic notation, and it showed everything. Sol System, Alpha Centauri, Proxima. And right beside them, systems he knew only from enemy briefings. Sanguinari core worlds, their home systems, on the same map. Labeled as equals, the technology clearly responded to her. The light from the wall fed into her palm, a two-way energy transfer. The interface was biological, but the information it displayed was formatted for a human viewer. Standard Terran dating, standard scientific notation. Schematics flickered into view next, replacing the star map. Massive orbital rings, planetary-scale atmospheric processors. Designs that would take a human engineering course a decade to draft were rendered in perfect detail. And the authorship tags along the bottom were in both languages. Human Standard and Sanguinari Script. Joint Development Projects. Co-signed. A historical log autoplayed. The date stamp made Jake's breath catch. 412 years ago. A voice, synthesized but clear, began a narrative in Human Standard. It spoke of the Great Alliance, a period of shared exploration and technological exchange. It described first contact not as a battle but as a cautious mutual discovery. The voice detailed joint colonies, shared research outposts. The temple itself was one of them, a biotechnical research facility focused on environmental stabilization, a peace project. The current war, the one that had defined Jake's entire life and career, wasn't mentioned. The record simply stopped. The last entry was a routine maintenance log. Then silence. The fracture wasn't in the record. It was the record's end. The war wasn't the natural state of things. It was an interruption, a catastrophic failure in a relationship that had once built wonders. The hatred, the propaganda, the years of shooting at silhouettes he was told were monsters. It all rested on a foundation of shared history that had been deliberately buried or forgotten. The temple wasn't just a ruin. It was evidence. A relic from a time when their species weren't enemies but partners, architects. The weapon he thought she might be trying to activate was a terraforming device. The monster he was supposed to kill was the inheritor of a legacy that included his own people. The conflict wasn't a righteous crusade. It was a tragedy, a long, bloody misunderstanding fought over the corpse of their own collaboration. He looked from the holograms to Lyra. Her expression wasn't triumphant. It was grim, sad, she knew. Her people had their own version of this forgotten history. They were both fighting a ghost war, battling over the broken pieces of something they once built together. The truth was a lot heavier than a rifle. The energy source was never a weapon. It was the planet's heart. The pulse Jake had tracked wasn't a machine. It was a crystallized core, a quantum field generator buried deep beneath the temple designed to regulate the whole biosphere. The Great Alliance built it to heal worlds, to fix atmospheric imbalances, to coax life from dead rock. It was a tool for creation, but a tool by its nature can be repurposed. A scalpel can save a life or end one. It just depends who's holding it and what they intend. The heart manipulated quantum probability fields on a planetary scale. It didn't just move dirt. It convinced reality to be different, to allow for new ecosystems, to stabilize unstable geology. It was subtle work, precise, and it required a constant, delicate touch. That was the Hemisphere's role. Their unique biology could interface with the core's control systems, a living operating system for a planet-sized computer. The living biometal beams throughout the temple, like the one holding Lyra, were its neural network. The interface, but the system was damaged. Centuries of neglect and the residual energy from their war had corrupted it. The control protocols were failing. The living metal was acting on base instinct, seizing the nearest compatible energy source, Lyra, and draining it to keep itself stable. It was a panic response, a dying animal clamping its jaws shut. The subtle terraforming fields were gone, replaced by a raw building energy surge. The heart wasn't healing anymore. It was having a seizure, and the seizure threatened to rip the planet apart. Jake's engineering training kicked in, reading the schematics that flashed across the holo display. He recognized the principles. Containment fields, energy conversion matrices. The theory was sound even if the tech was alien. The danger was simple physics. An uncontrolled release of that much quantum-aligned energy wouldn't be an explosion. It would be an unraveling. It wouldn't just crater the site. It would destabilize the planet's core, turn the atmosphere to soup, and scatter the debris across the solar system. A very final, very permanent kind of terraforming. The solution was the problem. To stop it, someone had to interface with the core and guide the energy back into its proper channels. a soft shutdown, a controlled bleed-off. But the only interface was biological. Hemisphere biology, the very thing the system was currently killing. Lyra was the only key, and she was too weak to turn the lock without dying in the process. The heart was a perfect mirror of their situation, a device built for cooperation, twisted by war into an instrument of mutual destruction. Its original purpose was their only way out. But using it required them to be what it was designed for, partners, not enemies. The machine needed them to remember what they had forgotten, and it would kill them all if they failed. The energy surge from the heart didn't stay contained. It pulsed outward, a massive quantum spike that lit up every sensor array in the system. On the human cruiser orbiting high above, alarm klaxons blared. Colonel Martinez saw the readings, a power signature unlike anything on record, emanating from the temple site. His conclusion was immediate, born of years of fighting a tricky enemy. The Sanguinari had found a weapon. They were activating it. His command crackled over Jake's finally clearing comms. Morrison, report. The site is hot. We are reading a massive energy buildup. Assume hostiles have WMD capability. Your orders are to secure the artifact.
Eliminate any Sanguinari forces on site.
Do not let that weapon fire. At the same moment, on the Sanguinari frigate holding position on the dark side of the moon, Commander Thorne saw the same spike. His analysis was a perfect mirror. The humans had cracked the ancient technology. They had turned a relic of the Alliance into a bomb. His transmission sliced through Lyra's own comm, the Sanguinari language sharp and urgent. Lyra. The humans are attempting to use the heart. Its defensive protocols must be activated. Neutralize the threat. Use whatever force is necessary. Prevent the detonation at all costs. 2 forces, 1 conclusion. Mutual assured destruction in the making. Dropships from both sides broke orbit, cutting through the thinning dust storm. They touched down on opposite ridges overlooking the temple, their landing gears crunching on the crystalline rock. Human Marines in environmental armor fanned out, taking cover behind rock formations. Sanguinari shock troops, their movements a blur of dark carapace and pale skin, flowed from their own craft. The temple sat in the valley below, the energy field around it making the air shimmer like a heat haze. It was the only prize. Both sides aimed for it. The energy field itself became the third combatant. It was unstable, chaotic. It played havoc with targeting systems. Scopes glitched. Missile locks failed. The field distorted space just enough to make precise orbital strikes impossible. A laser blast might veer off course. A railgun slug could simply vanish. This forced the conflict into a close-quarters ground fight. A brutal personal engagement around a ticking time bomb. Evacuation orders were given and ignored. The commanders wanted the device. They wanted it secured, or they wanted it denied to the enemy. The troops on the ground just knew they were advancing into a storm of energy and enemy fire. Jake heard Martinez's order. Secure the artifact. Kill the hostiles. He looked at Lyra, the hostile. Lyra heard Thorne's command. Activate defensive protocols. Neutralize the threat. She looked at Jake, the threat. Their commanders had seen the same data and drawn the exact opposite. Perfectly logical, perfectly catastrophic conclusions. They were both following protocol. They were both being good soldiers. And their good soldiering was about to get everyone on the planet killed. The first shots rang out. A crack of human railguns answered by the searing hiss of Sanguinari plasma. The battle for the temple had begun, not to control a healing device, not to uncover history, but to prevent the other side from using the doomsday machine they were both convinced the other had built. Jake and Lyra were trapped in the middle, the only 2 people on the planet who knew the truth. Their loyalty was to their sides. Their duty was to their commands. But their reality was the unstable heart and the 2 armies who were about to trigger it, through sheer, terrified aggression. The choice was no longer about mission parameters. It was about survival, theirs and everyone else's. They had to pick a side, the one they were born into, or the one that might actually stop the world from ending. Lyra pressed her palm against the central console. The living metal of the floor flowed up to meet her hand, the connection immediate and violent. Her whole body went rigid. A sharp gasp tore from her throat. The light beneath her skin, already faint, flickered like a dying ember. She was trying to interface to push her will into the system, but she didn't have the energy. The biointegration process demanded a full charge. A healthy hemisphere could handle it. She was running on fumes. The system was a powerful engine, and it needed a strong driver. Trying to steer it in her condition was like trying to stop a crashing ship by grabbing the wheel with broken fingers. It would tear her apart. The heart reacted badly to the weak connection. The quantum containment field, which had been pulsing with a steady, if growing rhythm, began to shudder. Energy discharges, raw and uncontrolled, arced from the central core to the chamber walls. Each discharge left a scorch mark on the stone and a ringing in the air. Crystalline structures embedded in the ceiling groaned, then cracked. Shards of glowing rock rained down, shattering on the floor. The temple itself was coming apart under the stress. The archways that defied physics began to look less impossible and more fragile. Jake watched, his engineer's mind racing through human solutions. He could try to jury-rig a capacitor from his gear, divert the energy, maybe trigger a controlled overload, standard procedure for a failing reactor. But this wasn't a reactor. It was a biological control system. His tools were made for circuits and wires. The heart read life signs. It responded to biological signatures. His attempt to patch into a console with a multi-tool resulted in nothing. The living metal rejected the foreign contact. It was like trying to plug a power cell into a tree. Incompatible systems. The containment protocols from his training would only make it worse. Trying to bottle up that much quantum energy would increase the pressure. It would turn the eventual explosion from a planet killer into a system-wide event. The only way to stop it was to guide it, to gently ease the energy back into its proper channels. A soft landing, and that required a specific touch, a Heminser's touch. The system was designed for one physiology and one physiology only. There was no workaround, no override code, no manual control. It was biological authentication at the most fundamental level. The resolution was a brutal either-or. Either Lyra sacrificed herself, pushing her failing body to complete the interface and almost certainly burning out her system in the process. Or they did nothing, and watched the energy build until it erased the temple, the planet, and everyone on it. Two terrible choices, a personal death or an impersonal apocalypse. The conventional options had run out. They were standing in the center of a system built for cooperation, and the only way to survive it was to break every rule they'd ever been taught about each other. The solution wouldn't be found in a manual. It had to be something new, something neither of their sides would ever approve of. The impossible choice demanded an unconventional answer. Jake looked at the heart's schematics, the ancient diagrams glowing in the air. They weren't blueprints for a bomb. They were plans for a garden, a terraforming device. The energy wasn't meant to be contained like a warhead. It was meant to be channeled, directed. The original purpose wasn't destruction. It was renewal. A jumpstart for a dead world. The problem wasn't the energy. It was the blockage. The heart was trying to do its job, but the pathways were damaged. The energy had nowhere to go. So it built up. Pressure without release. They didn't need to stop it. They needed to aim it. The plan was insane. It required two people to do one job. A human engineer and a Heminser operator working in perfect sync. Jake would have to manually reroute the primary energy conduits using his tools on the physical systems. At the exact same time, Lyra would have to use her biological interface to guide the quantum fields through those new pathways. It was a dance. One person leading the hardware, the other the software. Two different systems that were never meant to work together, human tech and Heminser biology. The timing had to be perfect. A misstep on his part, and the energy would flash fry the chamber. A hesitation on hers and the fields would collapse, causing an implosion. The margin for error was zero. The energy release could go two ways. If they succeeded, the built-up power would flood into the planet's ley lines, the subterranean energy channels the Alliance had mapped centuries ago. It would saturate the dead soil, purge the toxins from the air, kick the biosphere back into motion. The craters would bloom. The true purpose of Zaparia Prime would finally be realized. If they failed, that same energy would arc out of control. It wouldn't just destroy the temple. It would scour the planet down to its molten core. They weren't just risking their lives. They were gambling with the entire world. He pitched the idea over the comm. Colonel Martinez's response was instant, static, anger. Negative, Morrison. That's a direct energy transfer into unknown systems. You're handing the enemy the keys to a planetary-scale weapon. Secure the device or destroy it. That is an order. On her end, Lyra got the same reception. Commander Thorne's voice was cold. The human seeks to trick you. He will use the redirection to target our forces. Activate defensive protocols. That is your only objective. Both commanders saw the same thing. A trap, a trick, an advantage for the other side. They preferred the certainty of mutual destruction to the risk of mutual trust. The temple groaned in agreement with the commanders. A large crack split the ceiling, dust and rock shards raining down. The floor beneath their feet vibrated with the strain. The energy pulses were coming faster now, less rhythm and more frantic shuddering. The light in the room stuttered between blinding white and ominous red. They were out of time for debate, out of time for orders. The redirect plan was the only option left that didn't end with everyone dead. It wasn't a military solution. There was no victory condition for either side. No flag planted on a captured weapon. It was a survival solution. The only way out required them to stop being soldiers from opposing armies and start being partners trying to save a world. It reframed the entire conflict. Winning wasn't about conquest. It was about collaboration. A concept that was, apparently, more alien to their commanders than anything else on this planet. They were on their own. Jake watched the energy readings on his wrist unit spike into the red. Minutes, maybe less. The redirect plan was solid, in theory, but it required a hemisphere at full strength to guide the quantum fields. Lyra was fading. Her internal light was a dull gray flicker. She needed a charge. A biological one. The kind his training manuals had whole chapters warning against. Providing aid or comfort to the enemy. Section 4, paragraph 2. A court-martial offense. It wasn't just a rule. It was a fundamental boundary. The line you didn't cross. His own heart hammered against his ribs, a steady human rhythm next to the heart's frantic stutter. Every instinct said no. She was the enemy. A vampire. A soldier who could turn that energy against his people the second she was strong enough. Trusting her was insanity. But watching the planet die because he followed protocol was a different kind of wrong. He looked at her. She was trying to stand, her hand braced against the console, her whole body trembling with the effort. She wouldn't ask. He knew that now. Her code was too rigid. She would die following her rules before she'd break them to save herself. Outside, the sound of battle intensified. The sharp crack of railgun fire. The sizzle of plasma. He could see muzzle flashes through the cracked temple entrance. Human armor. Sanguinary carapaces. They were getting closer. Both sides fighting to reach the core, to secure the weapon, or destroy it. They'd storm the chamber soon, and they'd find a failed interface and a dying bomb. The living metal beam that had trapped Lyra pulsed erratically, reacting to the approaching life signs. It slithered, a blind seeker, toward the nearest energy signature. Another complication. The temple itself was joining the fight. He made the decision. It wasn't a grand moment. No fanfare. Just a quiet internal click. He unsealed the collar of his environmental suit. The air in the temple was thin, laced with toxic spores. A calculated risk. He pulled a combat knife from his belt. The metal gleamed in the unstable light. Lyra's eyes tracked the movement, her body tensing. An enemy soldier with a blade. An expected threat, he didn't point it at her. He held his own forearm out. The skin was pale under the suit's light. "You need energy to complete the interface," he said, his voice flat. Calm. "You can't redirect the heart without it. Take what you need." He offered the knife. An invitation. A violation of every order he'd ever been given. She stared at him. The intelligence in her violet eyes was clouded with pain, but the shock was clear. Her translator hissed. "Your blood? You offer this? Voluntarily?" The concept was foreign. Unthinkable. Her ethical code demanded consent. His military code forbade giving it. They were at a standstill built on two sets of rules that said this was impossible. The floor pitched under them. A massive energy discharge blew out a section of the far wall. They were out of time. The standoff was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Yes," he said, the word final. Voluntarily. It was the ultimate break. The line crossed. He wasn't a soldier following orders anymore. He was a man making a choice. An offer to a partner, not an enemy. The dynamic between them shifted in that instant. The old labels of human and hemisphere, ally and enemy, dissolving in the face of a simple, terrible necessity. Lyra's eyes narrowed, the pain clearing for a second, replaced by a focused intensity. She didn't reach for the knife. Her hand, trembling slightly, came up. A warning. My biology. The process. It does not just transfer energy, It links, a quantum resonance. The connection will be permanent. There is no undoing it. Her translator rendered the words flat, but the weight behind them was immense. For her, it was a statement of fact. For him, a final chance to back out. He nodded once. A quick motion. The floor shook again. No more time for debate. He pressed the blade against his own forearm. A sharp, clean pain. The blood welled up, dark red against his skin. He held his arm out. An offering. A covenant. She moved fast. A blur of motion that shouldn't have been possible in her state. Her hand closed around his wrist. Not with violence, but with a strange, clinical precision. Her head dipped. Her fangs weren't for tearing. They were for interface. They pressed against the cut. There was a brief cold sensation, not pain. A deep vibrating hum that traveled up his arm and into his chest. His heart stuttered for a single beat, then hammered hard against his ribs, falling into a new synchronized rhythm with a second heartbeat that wasn't his own. Her biology did the rest. Her quantum-aligned organelles processed his blood. They didn't just absorb the nutrients. They read the quantum signature of his cells. His DNA, his self. The process created a feedback loop. A bridge. His nervous system lit up with signals that weren't his. He felt a wave of profound aching weakness. A hollow hunger that was hers. Then a sudden shocking flood of strength. His own. The world doubled. He saw the chamber through his own eyes, the flickering lights, the cracking ceiling. And he saw it through hers. A wash of thermal gradients, energy flows. The intricate web of the heart's control matrix laid over the physical world like a glowing schematic. He felt her thoughts not as words but as impulses. Urgency. Focus. A complex calculation of quantum probabilities. It was overwhelming. Disorienting. Two people sharing one nervous system. The heart reacted. The violent, shuddering pulses of energy smoothed. Became a steady, powerful thrum. The system recognized the new signature. Not a single hemisphere. Not a single human, a hybrid, a combined biological entity. The living metal beam that had been threatening him a moment before softened. It retracted from his boot, then flowed toward them both, not as a restraint, but as a conduit. It wrapped around their joined arms. A cool living band that connected them to the temple itself. They were no longer two individuals trying to operate a machine. They were a single control node. The authentication protocol was satisfied. Completely. The system, designed for cooperation centuries ago, finally had the right key. A key made of two enemies who had chosen to become one operator. The chaotic energy in the chamber stabilized. The redirect was no longer a desperate plan. It was an executable command. They had the control. Now they just had to use it before the armies outside finished their own fight and stormed the chamber. The redirect sequence initiated not with a button press, but with a shared thought. Their combined consciousness, a strange alloy of human logic and hemisphere intuition, pushed the command into the system. The heart fought them. It had been broken for too long, its pathways corrupted. It recoiled from the new directive, a wounded animal refusing treatment. For a terrifying second, the energy conduits lining the chamber walls flared a violent, blinding white. The hum rose to a shriek. The floor plates vibrated so hard it felt like the whole temple would shake itself apart. The system didn't want to heal. It wanted to explode. Then the energy found the new paths, the ones Jake's engineering mind had mapped and Lyra's biological control was forcing open. It rushed through the ancient ley lines beneath the planet's crust, not as a destructive wave, but as a targeted flood. The light from the conduits shifted. The harsh white softened to a deep, resonant blue. The shriek dropped to a steady, powerful thrum that you felt in your teeth. Outside the temple, the battle froze. A human Marine, finger on the trigger, lowered his rifle. A sanguinary shock trooper, poised to strike, straightened up. They all watched as the energy, visible as a wave of soft blue light, rolled out from the temple across the cratered landscape. It touched the bioluminescent fungi first. The scattered patches of soft blue glow on the rocks erupted. They didn't just brighten. They multiplied, spreading across the stone in seconds, a swift, silent explosion of life. The entire valley floor began to pulse with a gentle, interconnected light. The energy wave hit the ionized dust next. The orange haze that had choked the air for weeks began to settle. The particles lost their charge, falling like fine snow, clearing the atmosphere. For the first time since Jake had landed, he could see the sky. A deep violet dotted with unfamiliar stars. The ground itself changed. The sharp, crystalline edges of the rock formation seemed to soften. A faint green moss began to spread from cracks in the stone, a color that hadn't existed on this planet in centuries. The air in Jake's compromised suit filter suddenly registered as clean. The toxic spore count dropped to 0. The planet was taking a deep, cleansing breath. The catastrophic energy release, the thing both armies had seen as a weapon firing, became a planetary-scale reset button. The weapon became a tool. The destruction became creation. It was the original function, finally restored. Not by one species overcoming the other, but by two working in perfect impossible sync. The collaboration repurposed the imminent disaster into a genesis event. The soldiers on the ridges, human and sanguinary, just stood there. Their fight seemed very small now, pointless. The real power wasn't in destroying the other side. It was in what they could build together. The healing pulse washed over them all, a silent, undeniable argument for a different way. The war was still happening. But here in this valley, it had just been rendered obsolete by a simple act of cooperation. The silence was the first thing you noticed. The constant thrumming energy of the heart was gone. The air didn't vibrate. The dust had settled. The battle outside had stopped. You could hear the faint crackle of cooling rock. A human marine and a sanguinary shock trooper stood 10 feet apart, weapons lowered, staring not at each other but at the new moss growing between their boots. Both armies held their positions. Defensive perimeters. No one advanced. No one retreated. A tense, quiet stalemate around a temple that was no longer a target, but a monument to something no one understood. Lyra stood without support. The gray, sickly cast to her skin was gone. Her internal luminescence had returned, a soft, steady blue pulse that mirrored the light now emanating from the stabilized temple systems. She was strong, stronger than before. The energy transfer from Jake, stabilized by the successful redirection, had fixed more than just the immediate problem. It had recharged her completely. She flexed her hand, watching the light play under her skin. It was a new kind of strength, a shared one. The link was still there, a low-grade hum in the back of Jake's mind. He could feel the edges of her awareness, a faint sense of her physical state, a calm focus, a lingering surprise. It wasn't intrusive. It was just present, like hearing a conversation in another room. They didn't need to speak. A shared glance carried volumes. The quantum entanglement was a permanent fixture, a biological fact. They were two separate people, but their operating systems were now networked. The comms erupted. Colonel Martinez's voice, stripped of its earlier panic, was all cold, hard command. Morrison, report status. Secure the site. Prepare for immediate debrief. I want a full account of your actions and the current tactical disposition of all sanguinary forces. A moment later, Lyra's own comm buzzed with Commander Thorne's clipped tones. Lyra, explain the energy event. Confirm neutralization of the human operatives. Your primary objective remains the security of the artifact. Both commanders, miles above on their respective ships, were trying to reassert control, to fit the event back into their narrow boxes of intel and orders. The boxes no longer fit. The evidence was against them. The landscape itself had turned witness. The valley, once a dead, cratered wasteland, now glowed with soft blue fungi and patches of green moss. The air was clean. The sky was clear. The result of their cooperation was visible from orbit. The result of their army's conflict was a few scorch marks and some dented armor. One approach had nearly destroyed the planet. The other had started to heal it. The data was inconvenient. Inside the temple, the ancient systems hummed with a gentle, stable power. The holographic displays showed the energy flowing smoothly through the planetary grid, a maintenance cycle, a healthy rhythm. The weapon was gone. The tool was working. The immediate crisis was over. The bomb was disarmed. But the real trouble was just starting. They hadn't just saved a planet. They had broken the chain of command. They had ignored direct orders. They had collaborated with the enemy, and they had succeeded spectacularly. That kind of success creates problems for people who profit from conflict. Their actions had set a precedent, a very dangerous, very inconvenient one. They had proven that the official story was wrong, that the enemy could be a partner, that the only way to win was to stop fighting. Military command structures, human and sanguinary alike, are not built to handle that kind of truth. They would try to ignore it, or they would try to bury it, but the truth was now standing in a healed valley waiting for them. 3 months after Zapariah Prime, Jake Morrison's new duty post was the joint exploration vessel Harmony. The name was optimistic. The ship was a patchwork of human alloy and sanguinary biotech, a political statement with engines. He boarded through a human-designed airlock that led to a corridor lined with the organic, pulsing veins of Hemisphere architecture. It smelled like ozone and something faintly coppery. His old squad would have laughed. His new assignment was a direct result of the one thing the military hates more than failure: an inconvenient success. The quantum entanglement didn't fade. It settled, a constant, low-grade awareness of another consciousness. He knew when Lyra was focused. He felt the echo of her frustration when a console resisted her touch. She, in turn, could sense his rising pulse during a tricky maneuver, the way his engineering mind would race through calculations. It made them unnervingly effective. On a mission to stabilize a second heart device on a desolate moon, they didn't need to speak. He'd be rerouting a power conduit, his hands moving on human-style controls, while she'd be simultaneously adjusting the quantum field balance through a biological interface. Their actions were perfectly synchronized. A human hand turning a valve at the exact moment a Hemisphere thought shifted an energy flow. They stabilized the ancient terraformer in 6 hours. The projected time for a human team was 6 weeks. For a sanguinary team, a month. Together they were a new kind of tool. Their skill sets merged in strange ways. Her deep knowledge of ancient Alliance archaeology provided the context. His combat engineering provided the method. He could look at a collapsed structure and see load-bearing points and structural integrity. She could look at the same structure and read the glyphs, understanding its purpose and the logic behind its design. He fixed the machine. She understood its soul. Operating together, they could bring dead systems back online with an efficiency that made both their commands deeply uncomfortable. They achieved results. Impossible ones. That's the one thing a military bureaucracy can't ignore, even if it hates the method. The higher-ups on both sides were forced to accept the partnership. Reluctantly. They were too valuable to court-martial and too unique to separate. Their file was stamped with a joint designation, a pilot project, an experiment. They were given a ship and a vague mandate: find more Alliance tech, stabilize it, report. It was a way to keep them busy and far away from the ongoing, messy political fallout of the war. They were a PR problem solved by sending them into deep space. What started as a forced partnership, a biological accident with strategic value, began to evolve. The constant, silent connection bred a familiarity that went beyond mere professional respect. They learned to navigate the oddities of each other's minds. His dry, pragmatic humor began to leak into her thoughts. Her patient, long-term perspective tempered his impulsive reactions. They weren't just a team. They were a single unit with 2 bodies. The adversity on Zapariah hadn't just created an alliance. It had forged a new kind of bond, one that proved collaboration wasn't just a strategy. It was an upgrade. Jake Morrison's career path had taken a hard left turn into the weird. He'd signed up for combat engineering, not galactic archaeology with a side of shared consciousness. His contract definitely didn't mention permanent quantum entanglement with a vampire. There was no line item for feeling the echo of an alien colleague's thought process while recalibrating a thruster array. The military liked things simple. This was the opposite of simple. Operating with the link was like seeing with a new sense. He'd look at a piece of ancient machinery, a hunk of rock and metal, and his engineering brain would see stress points and power flows. But through the connection, he'd also get a flash of intuition from Lyra, a sense of the device's original purpose, a hint of the cultural context behind its design. They perceived the technology in layers. He saw the hardware. She saw the history. Together, they understood the whole machine in a way a team of purely human or purely sanguinary experts never could. It was an unfair advantage. Their discoveries piled up, The Harmony charted a course through the fringe systems, following energy signatures that matched the Zapiraya prime readings. They found a derelict orbital ring, its human-made skeleton intertwined with sanguinary biotech. They uncovered a listening post buried in an asteroid, its logs detailing joint surveys of nebulas that were now contested battle zones. Every find was another piece of evidence. The Great Alliance wasn't a myth. It was a lost reality, its bones scattered across the sector. They were the cleanup crew for a 4-century-old divorce. The ship itself was a floating experiment. The first joint vessel in living memory, the crew was a tense mix of human naval personnel and sanguinary tech acolytes. Meals in the mess hall were quiet affairs. The humans stayed on their side, the Hemincers on theirs. They all followed orders. They ran the ship, but the distrust was a low hum in the background, quieter than the engines but always there. Everyone was professional. Nobody was friendly, except for the command team. Jake and Lyra's strange synergy was the only thing that made the whole awkward arrangement work. They were the proof of concept. This made them valuable and untouchable. Their success rate was too high to ignore. Command on both sides wanted the tech they found, the data they recovered, the strategic advantage they represented, so the admirals and commanders tolerated the bizarre command structure. They overlooked the biological link that made their security teams nervous. They accepted the weekly reports filed in a blended format that used both technical languages. The war was still on, but Jake and Lyra had been granted a unique diplomatic immunity based entirely on their ability to get impossible jobs done. Jake would sometimes catch his reflection in a polished bulkhead. Combat engineer's hands, a military haircut that was growing out, and the faint invisible tether to a consciousness that thought in a different language, saw energy flows instead of wiring diagrams. His career had transformed beyond all recognition. He'd gone from following orders to writing a new playbook, one awkward, successful mission at a time. It was a long way from simple salvage. Their partnership became the shaky foundation for something larger. Every stabilized terraformer, every deciphered archive, every successful joint operation with the mixed crew was a small argument for a different future. It was a quiet, practical rebellion. They weren't politicians making speeches. They were a mechanic and an archaeologist, fixing what was broken and showing that the pieces, however alien, could still fit together. The Alliance wasn't being rebuilt in a Senate hall. It was being reassembled, bolt by bolt in the dark between stars. The records they pulled from the derelict data cores were unequivocal. Maps showing joint colonies, technical schematics co-signed by human and sanguinary lead scientists, treaties, trade agreements. The Great Alliance wasn't a hopeful story. It was a documented, functioning reality that had spanned generations. The depth of the collaboration was staggering. They hadn't just shared technology. They had shared worlds, built them together from the ground up. The evidence was a sledgehammer to 4 centuries of propaganda on both sides. Some people don't like it when you bring a sledgehammer to their cherished beliefs. Hardliners in both militaries pushed back immediately. On the human side, commanders who'd built careers on anti-sanguinary rhetoric dismissed the findings as enemy disinformation. Ancient tech, they argued, was unreliable. The records could be forgeries. On the sanguinary side, traditionalist clans saw the collaboration as a contamination of their pure biological science. They preferred a clean war to a messy peace. Both factions had power structures that depended on the conflict continuing. The truth was an inconvenience. They fought the evidence with paperwork and bureaucratic delays, trying to bury the past again. They preferred the simple clarity of an enemy to the complex reality of a former partner. The technology they recovered refused to be ignored. A Hemincer bioreactor, when integrated with a human power grid, increased efficiency by an order of magnitude. Human metallurgical techniques applied to sanguinary living metal created armor that could self-repair in minutes. The science wasn't just advanced. It was complementary. Each species' knowledge filled the gaps in the others. Labs on both sides, initially skeptical, began filing joint patent applications. The economic incentive for peace started to outweigh the military budget for war. You can't argue with a reactor that powers a city for a decade on a single charge. They took the Zapiraya model and scaled it. Planetary restoration teams, mixed crews of human engineers and Hemincer biotechnicians, began landing on dead worlds scarred by the war. They didn't build monuments. They turned on the lights. They activated dormant heart devices, channeling energy into dead soil and poisoned atmospheres. Barren rock began to show the first hints of green. Radioactive dust storms settled. It was quiet, practical work. A silent rebuttal to every argument for continued fighting. The proof was in the dirt. The front lines went quiet. Not from a treaty signing, but from a gradual, grinding halt. Soldiers on both sides found themselves staring across at each other over ground that was no longer worth dying for. Diplomats, previously ignored, found themselves with new leverage. They had something to offer now, a future. Negotiations shifted from territorial disputes and prisoner exchanges to technology sharing and joint economic zones. The conversation changed. It was no longer about how to win the war. It was about how to manage the peace. Jake and Lyra became a symbol, not because they wanted to be. They were just doing their job. But their image was everywhere. A human and a Hemisphere on the bridge of a joint ship. A photo of them working side by side on a terraformer console. Their strange, quantum-entangled partnership was the living embodiment of the rediscovered alliance. It was hard to hate an abstraction when the abstraction had a face. Two faces, actually. Their success made the idea of cooperation seem less like treason and more like common sense. The rediscovered past offered a blueprint, a template for how things could work. Not a perfect union, but a functional one. A way to coexist that didn't require one side to surrender. It demonstrated that collaboration wasn't a defeat. It was an upgrade, a force multiplier. The lost knowledge didn't just fill history books. It reshaped the present. It gave both civilizations a way out of a conflict that had long since stopped making sense, offering a future built not on the ashes of the enemy, but on the foundations they had once built together. The legacy wasn't just restored, it was put back to work. The quantum link held. It didn't fade or weaken. It became a permanent part of their operating system. A second layer of perception, a shared processing thread running in the background. For Jake, it was like always having a highly skilled, intuitively brilliant co-pilot whose thoughts arrived a half-second before his own. For Lyra, it was access to a form of linear, structural logic that her own biology lacked. The connection was stable, and it was beneficial. They were simply better together, more efficient, more capable. A problem that would stump a human engineer for weeks they could solve in hours. An archaeological puzzle that would take a Hemisphere scholar months to decipher. They could unravel in days. Not everyone approved. Back on Earth and the sanguinary homeworlds, certain voices still called it an abomination. A dangerous mingling of biology, an unacceptable security risk. Purists on both sides argued the connection was unnatural, a violation of the natural order. They filed official complaints. They called for the partnership to be dissolved, for the harmony to be grounded, for the two of them to be studied like lab specimens. The criticism was a constant, low-frequency hum in the background of their lives, like the ambient noise of a ship's engine. Annoying but easy to ignore when you're busy working. Their methods opened doors. Literally, they approached problems from angles neither species could manage alone. A derelict starship with a hybrid human sanguinary design had been a tomb for decades. Human teams couldn't get past the biological locks. Sanguinary teams couldn't navigate the hardened computer systems. Jake and Lyra walked onto the bridge. He interfaced with the terminal. She placed her hand on the organic control node. The ship's systems woke up for the first time in 50 years. Lights flickered on. The air recyclers coughed to life. They solved it before the coffee in the mess hall got cold. The terraforming projects were the best argument. Worlds that had been written off as permanent casualties of the war, their atmospheres poisoned and their soil dead, were coming back. The HART technology, operated by mixed crews trained in their methods, was doing its original job. Barren plains on Cyprus were showing the first signs of native grass. The acidic oceans of Tarvos were beginning to clear. It was a quiet, powerful rebuttal to the critics. You can't argue with a world turning green again. New ships were commissioned, more Harmony-class vessels. Their designs were a true fusion, not just a bolting together of parts. The crews were mixed by default. It was still awkward. The mess hall on the second ship, the Accordion, had the same tense quiet as theirs did at first. But it was a start. The model was spreading. They were no longer the only ones. Other teams began to form, not by command but by necessity. A human medic and a Hemisphere surgeon developed a new field med pack that could treat both physiologies. A mixed team of analysts cracked a coded sanguinary transmission using human decryption algorithms, revealing a hidden weapons cache that both sides then worked together to secure. The dam was breaking. The idea was spreading. Jake and Lyra developed a private joke. Whenever a new official complaint crossed their desk, forwarded from some bureaucrat who'd never left his homeworld, one of them would look at the other. "Better call the complaints department," Jake would say. Lyra would just nod, a faint smile touching her lips. There was no complaints department. That was the point. They were it. They were writing the new rules as they went, and the rule was to get the job done. No matter how many people complained about how you did it, their partnership proved that the most valuable resource wasn't territory or technology. It was perspective. A second way of seeing a problem. By transcending the old boundaries of species and suspicion, they didn't just survive. They expanded the definition of what was possible. The future wasn't about building higher walls. It was about building better bridges. And sometimes a bridge was just two people who decided to trust each other against all odds. And in doing so, showed everyone else the way. Jake and Lyra's story shows that the deepest conflicts can forge the strongest bonds. If we choose to look past the divisions we're taught, they went from enemies on a battlefield to partners sharing a single consciousness, proving the future isn't set by our differences, but by our courage to move beyond them. Sometimes saving everything doesn't require a weapon. It requires a sacrifice. It means giving a part of yourself to the person you were trained to see as a threat, and in doing so, finding a new way forward for everyone.